Selepas Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim melancarkan Forum Ekonomi Malaysia, terkini sesi soal jawab, dan kita boleh nampak bagaimana YG Rafizi Ramli memang genius ya di dalam memberikan jawapan dan juga rancangan-rancangan yang akan dilaksanakan ya di dalam membangunkan ekonomi negara kita. Maka dengan itu makin cemburulah ya Pembangkang ya melihat kepada ekonomi negara kita, kerajaan madani ini, dan kita lihat hari ini pelbagai isu ditunggang oleh mereka memanipulasi fakta, kebenaran dan sebagainya untuk menghasut rakyat ya, untuk menghasut rakyat mungkin membenci kepada pemimpin-pemimpin hari ini, terutamanya menyerang Perdana Menteri kita. Jadi sahabat semua, dengan itu saya ingin membawakan anda untuk mendengar sendiri sesi yang sedang berlangsung ketika ini, sesi soal jawab dan juga jawapan-jawapan Padu ya daripada YG Rafizi Ramli. Jadi sekali lagi tanpa buang masa, ayo kita tonton video ini.
If you look at let me just open up with some big picture first, right? Madani Ekonomi was launched back in July 2023. And then after that, there were a few other policies that were introduced, NATA, NIMP, semiconductor policy, etc. We have seen some good outcome, right? And the proof points. You mentioned about IPO, investment has started to be realized. The latest one, of course, is SEZ, right? Now, a lot of people's mind is that, is this real? Is it sustainable? And what is the difference now?
Thank you very much, Dato'. I think a lot of you are from the private sector. The proof of the pudding is if you are able to translate all these policy visions into actionable program designs, and we should be able to see this in our GDP numbers and Bursa and so on. The main difference, I think, is the government has moved away from one-size-fits-all, very thick planning. In the private sector, if we were to create value, it's very important to have a vision of where we want to be 4 or 5 years down the line, but then you work on specific growth initiatives. And this is translated all the way, and then you iterate as you go along. You look at how the market reacts to it. I think in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the complexity of our economy was very different, and therefore the stakeholders were very different. And we could survive by just having one big economic plan and then coordinate through the ministry and then just see how things happen. That's why we decided, even from Madani framework, economic Madani, is that there's no point trying to go with a Britannica encyclopedia fake document. Just have a vision and start focusing sector by sector, work with the sector and with the stakeholders, and then translate the action into actions very quickly, because that sense of progress is important. And I think that approach will make a difference to all this.
All right, thanks. We'll go into a bit more specific area. So the first is SEZ. So first, congratulations to you for signing that agreement finally with Singapore. We just wanted to find out your thoughts behind the SEZ. Again, what's special? What's so special, right? We are told that there are about 140 special economic zones around the world. And what do you think, why do you think this will work, right? And maybe finally is, Singapore is not necessarily the easiest country to negotiate with. Have we committed anything that you can share with us?
Well, I think this whole thing about realizing synergies between Singapore and Malaysia, especially Johor, is a common sense that should have prevailed 2-3 decades ago. But, you know, sometimes we have politics in the way, sometimes there was always a mistrust. But I think it's always about each country previously feel that we are in a competition with each other. Time is on our side, and everything seems to, the stars seem to be aligned in the sense that any right-minded leaders in Singapore or in Malaysia acknowledge the fact that given the geopolitical tensions, given the trade wars, we are better off working together to pitch this region to the world. And given the complementary advantages that Singapore can bring to the table and Johor has, it means that if I were an investor, a global investor, and I need to figure out how do I restructure my global operations against this backdrop, I would really love a place where I can have the sophistication of Singapore, given its robust capital markets, funding, ease of doing business, and also the resource that is offered by Johor. And I don't have to choose either one. And more importantly, I think a lot of global companies understand that ASEAN is going to be the fourth largest economy in 10 to 15 years' time. And it's not just a large economy, it is an economy defined by a youthful and digitally savvy population with a large percentage of middle class. This is going to be the next economic powerhouse. And in the same way that in the late 90s and in early 2000, a lot of global investments went into China in anticipation of the consumer demand in China. I think that's going to happen for ASEAN as well. So my plea, of course, to global investors, and this is, I think, what leadership of Singapore and Malaysia subscribe, is that, if you want to have a beachhead for ASEAN 10, 15 years' time, the best place is JSSEZ. You can structure your operations to take into account both, and I think it's going to be a good value offering to the world.
So with that optimism,
yeah.
right? I think I saw in your press statement that you say that now Johor contributes to about 9+% of the GDP of Malaysia. With that kind of optimism with SEZ, where will Johor be in terms of the contribution to GDP, say in 5 years down the road?
Well, early estimates now puts JSSEZ's contribution to about $28 billion addition to our GDP every year. So, the whole area, if it goes as planned, easily will be able to rival Klang Valley, in the next 5-10 years. But during the discussion, and this is the part where Datuk asked, how was it like negotiating with Singapore? We have some Singaporeans here. I have to say this, I think as Malaysians, we should not fear competition. If you go to the negotiating table and you are fair and you have good reasons for wanting certain things to go your way, the chemistry that we built in the beginning actually eased the process. It was very difficult, not so much because Singapore was difficult, but this whole concept of, a special economic zone that covers 2 countries is very rare in the world. Most special economic zone is implemented under one jurisdiction. You have those in China, those in Vietnam, right? So for the first time, we have to see how do we operate a single economic unit that is subject to regulations and laws and national policies of 2 countries. So therefore, we have to harmonize a lot of things. Singapore has to harmonize with their respective ministries. We have to harmonize with our respective policies and ministries. And then we have to come together and harmonize the 2 countries. So the process was complex, but it was helped by the fact that I think both the teams on Malaysia and Singapore side understand the value proposition. I think once you focus on value proposition, the give and take will happen. And if this is going to work, our plan at Ministry of Economy is that we need to create a new engine of growth. And of all the areas in Malaysia, the common sense tell you is that if we can leverage on the complementary elements of Johor and Singapore, Johor should be able to be that new engine of growth in the next decade.
Okay. We also saw an announcement about funding from the government, right? On both sides, Singapore and Malaysia, but Singapore, I think, a bit more specific on infrastructure. Would you be able to share with us how much is that coffer and how is that going to be disbursed?
I don't know how many in the auditorium actually goes through the national budget in detail, line by line. Actually, it has already been announced in 2025 budget that an initial sum of 5 billion ringgit is set aside for the infrastructure fund for JSSEZ. Now, I think the sum perhaps is not too much an issue, you know, it's open for debate. Is 5 billion enough or not? What I think we did radically different is this. The traditional method or mechanism to get infrastructure fund from the federal government can be long-winded. I mean, we have representatives from state governments here. You know, it's layer after layer. You have to go through the federal ministries, and then it went through a lot of budget screen before finally it comes to us at the Ministry of Economy. And then, because of that, the approach in the past has always been on greenfield industrial land. So, you know, if Johor wants to do this, Johor has to say, you know, I fork out money, this is the land, and then I have to bid for federal budget for the next 2, 3, 4 years, and then I build all the infrastructure, and then I will take another 10 years to populate it with investments. By that time, for all you know, Vietnam has beaten us to pulp. So we wanted to change it in the sense that if this were to be done as a private venture, right, you actually do everything investment by investments. We would like to work very closely with investors. You tell us what are you bringing, what do you need, and then we will then very quickly jump the queue and build the infrastructure. And instead of going through that rigorous annual budget screening, we have already set aside 5 billion ringgit for us to draw from that. And then if there is a need in the future, depending on, you know, the interest into JSSEZ, we can always put in more money set aside for the infrastructure charge.
Okay. The other thing is, even before this agreement signed, there's been quite a proliferation of data centers in Johor, right? And when we see some comments about data centers, it's just a block of building using a lot of energy and a lot of water, and with little multiplier effect, right? How do you, explain to these people who are pessimists, so to speak?
There's a lot of debate about the value of data center, especially at this current stage of investment into Malaysia. As with everything else in life, you know, there's good and bad. There's opportunities and problems that come with it. It's the same with data center. It causes a lot of power and also water, true. At this current stage, the huge investments that we hear of, a lot of the trickle effect basically went to the property sector and, you know, the construction. But not really in the nitty-gritty of the server rack and everything. We don't have ODM in the country and so on. So there's a lot of imports of these goods, you know, now. But Malaysia is expected to be a powerhouse of data centers, not just in this region. If we follow this trajectory, it's going to be a global powerhouse. If you imagine 10, 15 years down the line, we have so many data centers. And as Dr. Chris Miller, I think, alluded this morning, I don't think this is reversible. This is going to be the trend in the future. Data centers is going to be a utility just like electricity, water, and so on. So it's going to expand. Now, in 10, 15 years' time, if we have so many data centers, and data centers will go through its life cycle. You need to replenish the server rack, new ones coming, the ODM has to be there. So there is suddenly an opportunity that can accelerate us leapfrogging the value chain. So to Malaysia, my view is this, I mean, we take this demand on our energy and power system as a challenge. If anything, it means that we have to double down to strengthen and build more robustness for our energy sector, precisely because we need this. But if we are able to realize the potential to downstream our semiconductor, and instead of just doing back end, we are hoping that we can start producing made by Malaysia GPUs and chips in the next 5 to 10 years, then not only we create a new high-value economic sector that serves our own demand, we can then become a global player because other countries will require data centers as well. So that's basically, I think, we take a very long-term view about this whole AI and data centers contribution to our economy.
But related to that, again, is the call on renewable energy, right? So it's not just about being able to supply with energy, but green energy.
Yeah.
There's also talk about supplying green energy to Singapore as well, for example, right? So, and when we look at the supply and demand, we notice that just data centers alone, they will require now, based on what's happening, about 1.6 gig of power. At the same time, we also see that in the next 10 years, coal power plant, about 8 gig will be taken out from the market, right? So there is a need for a new supply, a set of supply. And if you just look at supply and demand, there is a shortfall now. So how fast can we get this to be implemented?
It's like, I like this reminder that necessity is the mother-in-law of all inventions, and it's even, I mean, you can tolerate your mother, but not your mother-in-law, So I think we've gone through these different stages in our economy, where we have to face this sudden massive demand. And suddenly, it threatens our system. In fact, that's how the power sector has evolved in this country. The early 90s, because of the sudden surge of demand for electricity, then we had to respond. We had to bring in IPP, and whatever we have now is basically a series of iterations over the last 30 to 40 years, responding to such demand surge. I think we are going through the same thing now, and it's going to be a big strain. That I have to admit. And then when we look at NETA and we project how fast we can install capacities, and as importantly, improve our grid so that our grid can take and harness as much renewable energy as possible. The rate has to double than what we have now, and usually the challenge is the funding. So that's why I think we have to see this huge...
funding is ready.
Yeah, demand, precisely. That's why this demand surge is actually good for the economy and good for the system, because the surge comes with money. What we need to do as a government and as a private sector is to innovate our market to be able to expedite and realize this money into installed capacities. And that's why I think there has been good progress in the last 1 year. If NETA was launched in July 2023, and within a year, I think, apart from some important policy decisions allowing exports to Singapore, while it doesn't really make that much difference in terms of the energy balance of Malaysia and Singapore, but it is very important to send the signal to the world that we are open for business. Please bring your money and invest to Malaysia to expand renewable capacities. CRES, I think, was announced almost a year after NETA, and then LSS 5 is about to be finalized. There will be LSS 6. So what we are seeing is this. We have transformed our power industry and grid, access to grid, from one that was closed and based on quota. And so long as we are closed and it was based on quota, it's very difficult to scale up new capacity to the one that we have now, where it is open, it is accessible, it is market-driven, it allows for willing seller and willing buyer by having willing charges. So this, I think, should be able to allow for renewable capacities to be scaled up much faster than what we have ever seen in the past.
Okay, maybe we just shift gear a bit about the 13 Malaysia Plan. You mentioned earlier that you're going to announce it sometime this year. You mentioned that there were 4 mega trends in the 13 Malaysia Plan. Apart from what we have seen so far under the Madani economy and all the other policies, can you share a bit of insight in terms what else are you going to introduce in the 13 Malaysia Plan?
I think I can give hints at this stage because we've gone through this series of bold and radical initiatives with the Prime Minister. If I had not gone through it, I would say, no, I can't, I'm gagged, you know. So we've gone through a lot of discussions, and it is now had been presented to the Prime Minister. We want RMK 13 to be very dramatic and very radical because it is about preparing the foundation and changing the structure that suits Malaysia's next place as a developed nation. So what I can share that is this. I think what may surprise the public is this. In the past, RMK 5-year plan has always been seen as an economic plan. I remember 20, 30 years back, you know, every time there is a 5-year plan, people will be queuing to try to get the list of projects. And those were the years, you know. And then RMK has always been synonymous with economic plan. The surprise of RMK 13, I think, is a lot less on economy. It's going to be education, upskilling, skill, is all about the talent. Because all this grand plan that we have is just, you know, dreams on paper, unless we make sure that we scale up our education all the way from primary to tertiary, and we make sure that our workforce can leapfrog to suit the kind of demands that we have. So I think it's enough to say that if anything, it should be more exciting to the country because it involves everyone. If in the past RMK is only about, well, at least people think that it's just about economic plans, and therefore only certain type of people, analysts, read in details about RMK, I'm hoping that with the focus on education and talent and skills, it is relevant and applicable to every single Malaysian. But we have to go through that process.
How would you address this particular target, right? So under Ekonomi Madani, there was one target about the share of labor to GDP by 2030 to be 45%. So next RMK will end at 2030. We are probably around what, 33% now?
33%.
And you have an interim target by 2025 this year, or 40%. Are you going to be falling short of that? Looks like
we definitely will miss the RMK 12 compensation to employees target of 40%. I think it's given. The Ekonomi Madani's target is that within 10 years of Ekonomi Madani, compensation to employees ratio, CE target, will be 45%, right? Now, it's still an extremely challenging target, to be frank, but I think we have started the ball rolling, albeit a lot of noises, people like it or don't like it, different sectors will feel differently about it. And a lot of it is a function of, first, basically labor market reforms. We have to accept that, our workforce is not paid enough. I mean, the median salary of about 9 million plus employees that we track. When I came into office, the first statistic we released was basically quarterly wage report of formal sector. Median salary is 2,600, which is only about 100 ringgit above basically poverty level, poverty income level, you know. In 2024, a year after that, it's gone up to about 2,750. So, as much as it's going to be a big challenge, I think we are on the right track in the sense that the sheer focus on wage increase is going to define and underpin all the other related economic plans that we have. And that's why, some people say this whole thing about civil service pay high is political. It's not. The one that is in government's control is civil service pay. And we need to hike it because we need to make sure that we push the salary band higher. I wish that we could do the same with the private sector, but it just doesn't work that way. You know, giving free money to private entities so that they can hike salary doesn't work. So what we do is that we come up with a scheme which is opt-in basis that ties productivity, wage increase, and so on. We call it progressive wage. We have announced minimum wage increase. So I think you can see that progressively in the next 5-7 years, government will continuously intervene and push for salary band to be higher, while at the same time, we push for higher skill job opportunities through the creation of new industries, higher level energy, technology content jobs that we create. The combination of this, I'm hoping that while, only time can tell whether we will hit 45%, but at least it creates the momentum that the trajectory will make sure that we get nearer to 45% within 10 years.
Okay. My last question before I open up to Slido might be related to income actually. So this discussion about M40, B40, T20 is no longer relevant. And it doesn't really reflect the, stratification of household, right, income. Now, you have got RON 95 subsidy rationalization coming up. The thing is that you're not going to use this stratification. So how are you going to reclassify the population and have that distribution to be given to the right segment of the population?
I mean, this whole B40, M40, and T20 classification is a legacy system that fits the demand of the time and the infrastructure of the time. I think we've adopted it since RMK10, or I think since RMK10. Back then, World Bank advocated for this rather simplistic, at least now it is seen to be simplistic, classification of B40, M40, T20, because at that time, that is the best way to classify given the statistic and data infrastructure that we have. Any countries in the world carries out household income and expenditure survey. From there, you will be able to see the income banding. But time has changed. By now, we know just drawing a statistical line is risky when it comes to inclusion and exclusion rates. If you draw the line at 5,000 ringgit, what if you are 5,010 ringgit, but you have about 10 people in your household? So by now, this issue about exclusion and inclusion rates actually become quite pertinent, but we are lucky because at this junction, technology allows us to go granular. We have clouds now, everyone has digital prints, and then all government records, majority of it is actually in digital format. We will be able to go through, to implement a more granular approach to it, to go on unique person by person's classification, but we need to put the data infrastructure first. And that's the whole hoo-ha about Padu. I mean, if we want to ensure that we are able to migrate from the B40, M40, T20 to a system that is fairer, more granular, and that really targets individual and household, we need that data infrastructure. The good news is that I think more or less we are there, you know, Prime Minister...
So RON 95 subsidy resolution, that data will be ready for RON 95 subsidy
The data, I think, is adequate and ready. The final stage now is to go to Cabinet to officially remove B40, M40, T20 policy and change it to a net disposable income approach that allows us to target more granularly. Most probably that's going to happen very soon because subsidy retargeting has to happen this year. So we need to prepare the eligibility criteria first in time for implementation. So I think we are at the final stage.
So we look forward to that.
Depends, Datuk. Some people do not look forward to that.
So AB, we will then shift to Slido questions.
Yeah.
There are many questions actually. I hope you can give a very short, succinct answer. Yeah? So the first one is that there's been so much focus on Johor. Why not Sarawak? You know, Sarawak has natural resources, largest state in Malaysia, Borneo remains left out.
No, I think we have to play by our strength, you know. So from the national perspective, we have identified clusters of growth to drive the next round of economic growth by the strength of each state. So Sarawak is leading and will continue to receive a lot of high-tech investments, but it's in energy transition. Sarawak is going to, I mean, because Sarawak is able to leverage two things, you know, its vast hydrocarbon resources as well as its vast natural resources that provides hydropower. Likewise, the northern region is going to focus on, you know, the advanced E&E, Klang Valley, you know, digital and tech and service, and the strength of Johor is leveraging on its proximity to Singapore. And the East Coast is on heavy industries because the CCUS, the carbon capture and storage facilities, is planned to be in East Coast.
So
I think
certainly it's not left out.
It's not left out.
Okay.
It's just that we play by each other's strength.
Okay. Next question, how does the government solve the food security issue by adapting Made by Malaysia?
Well, I think this is a very difficult question. You know, there are certain things that we have to produce ourselves. Sometimes it's okay to import, right? But to me, at the very least, we need to hit our self-sufficiency ratio for each of the major produce. And for this to happen, we cannot run our agriculture sector like the 70s and 80s using changkul. Actually, farming and agriculture is a very high-tech industry. And part of the challenges that we have now is basically in terms of machinery, in terms of technology, that does not allow agriculture to be run at the large scale as modern farming. So the shift towards higher content innovation, definitely one of the verticals for such innovation is for modern farming. And having that strength will then crowd in investments, and then I'm hoping that over the years, we can transform our food industry from one that is cottage industry, small scale, to one that is run as an industry. But at the moment, we have this huge gap when it comes to technology and innovation.
Yeah.
So this whole thing about Made by Malaysia will also address that.
Okay. Next question. The government, or many governments.
This is really fire start. I don't even have time to breathe. But
That's
okay.
good.
So
That's good. We still have 15 minutes.
Okay, so I'm looking at that 15 minutes ago. Okay.
So the question is, the government has been promoting TVET
Yeah.
for many RMKs, right? What has been the ROI?
Actually, I don't know. I don't think we have measured the ROI, to be frank. And that's something that we have to do better. And that's, I think, a challenge in government because, the bureaucracy and everything, a lot of money being spent. But if you're not careful, then we do small scale all over the place. And then while the sum is large, then you just don't have it just doesn't move the needle. So hence, when we talk about RMK 13 just now, Dato', I think that's also one of the key deliverable. We need to make sure that our focus on TVET actually will be able to translate into the kind of ROI. Certainly there is gap. Hence why in the private sector, people still talk about difficulty in getting the right talents and so on.
Okay. Next question, a bit on diversity. So, can increasing female labor force participation contribute towards boosting the economy? What does the government has in plans to promote that?
Yes, actually, I think we will not be able to meet our economic potential if we don't cross 60% women's labor participation. We are, I think, about what, 56, 57 now, around that. Countries such as Korea and other peers actually has a higher women's labor participation rate of about 64, 65%. So we have a lot of gaps. First, I think the restructuring of the economy will make it more palatable to get more women into workforce for the sole reasons that you will have more female going to universities. That's a trend. That's already the fact, But when our economy gets more complex, it's changing from one that is labor-intensive, manufacturing-intensive, to one that is innovation-based, service-based, and so on, the kind of jobs it creates will allow for more opportunities for women. And labor market reforms that is happening now is about trying to make sure it is as accommodative to the demand of, female workforce.
I just want to slip one question. This is a bit of interest for me as a banker. We heard during the negotiation with SEZ, Singapore, etc., that the government is prepared to bring in foreign banks into Malaysia and Johor, right? Are you able to say yes or no?
For the time being, I can state the fact that a lot of things were negotiated, but certainly in the final agreement, beyond what has been announced for Forest Cities Special Financial Zone, JSSEZ does not include anything on banking for the time being.
Okay, good.
That's in the agreement, that's the fact. I think it's dying to put me on record on that.
Next question from Slido, YB. What's the progress of Padu in assisting the subsidy rationalization?
So, Padu now has data points of 21 million Malaysians. That's about 11 million individual adults, and then with their dependents and so on, so it's about 21 million. That's quite a good number out of about 31 million population. So, as I mentioned earlier, it was very important to get the data ready before we move from B40, M40, T20 to a net disposable income approach. But of course, before we roll it out, we have to reopen Padu so that those who did not register before go in and register. And the discussion in government at the moment is that Ministry of Economy through Padu manages the back end of the implementation. That means that the eligibility of recipient will be decided through the mechanism. Cabinet is going to approve it. The biggest database that government has now is through Padu, and then so it's going to be decided through Padu, and then the recipient list will then be passed to MOF that is going to administer the implementation at the front end with the petrol station. So I think we will hear some announcements in the next few weeks on that.
Next question, YB, probably comes from a much younger population in the crowd. How can Malaysian youth be strategically involved and empowered to become key catalysts in driving the transition, especially from made in Malaysia to made by Malaysia?
You know, I said every time I got asked these questions, usually there'll be a series of social media posts cursing me after that. You know? I think we have to keep up with the demand. For the Gen Z and the millennials, you know, you live in a different era than what Datuk and I grew up with, you know. In the past, for example, right, in the past, we grew up in a situation where working a long, arduous career in one big organization is the way to go. And that's where all of us are here, you know, because they are big and then we grow. The world is changed in such a way that nowadays it's about value creation. And then it's both good and bad, you know, good in the sense that people have different success model, wealth creation model, career attainment model in the future, provided you upskill and you run with the pace of what is happening out there. Startups, innovation drives value now. You don't have to wait until you are 40 years old to become CEO. You can be a CEO at 25. You can go to venture capital and say, this is a good idea, I have this expertise, and then give me money. That was not available during our time, you know. But, okay, this is the part where people usually curse me. It's not easy. Just because 4 or 5 people in the world manage to do it, it doesn't mean that anyone who wants to do it can do it. It takes a lot of grit, it takes a lot of knowledge. You have to be out there and you have to be at the frontier. And therefore, you know, my appeal to the youth of Malaysia, you have to open up, you have to embrace competition, you have to see beyond the constraints. It is not the fault of everyone. If I want to do something, I will take it and run with it. If we can have more and more smart young people thinking like this, then I think our job is done. And that's what we are trying to do with RMK going forward, is to create the environment and ecosystem so that more and more young people from the Gen Z and millennials can create value, but you have to take risks. You are not going to make a millionaire at 30 if you work at Memang, for example. I don't think so. So it does require a lot of rewiring about how we see the future, our career, and so on. And if we have enough people doing that, Dato', I think then, you know, Gen Z will basically drive this. Before I go to the next thing about Memang.
Okay, next question, YB. What's the vision on KL-Singapore high-speed rail to bring Klang Valley into the JS SEZ mix?
I mean, Prime Minister has commented this, I think, when PM Lawrence was here. I think he mentioned it again today. I feel that the role of government is to really focus on enabling the ecosystem and therefore looking to develop public utilities and public goods. Then the question is high-speed rail between KL and Singapore falls into that? Most probably it's not. It's not public goods, because for rail transport, we actually have double tracking completed from Perlis all the way to JB. Government has made a decision to move to leasing rolling stock, so that our current capacity for rail track is only 30% now because of the limitation of rolling stock. We hope that we can push that beyond 50% by 2030, and therefore for public rail transportation, I think we already have that, and government is committed to that. So at the end of the day, this high-speed rail project has to be driven by the private sector, and the determinant is very much the dollars and cents. If it's financially viable, government is not going to stand in the way, but it has to be privately funded. And I think the race is out there to see who can come up with such a project that can be financially viable as a private project.
Okay. There's a question on impact of migrant workers. How do you see the presence of migrant workers as a possible cause of low wages in Malaysia?
It is. It is. I know that this is unpopular, especially to a lot of employers. But we are, as an economy, we are addicted to low-wage foreign labor, to the point that even when total cost of employment is actually comparable between low-skilled foreign labor and Malaysians, we are still addicted to it. Actually, for one person now, with the minimum wage, with EPF contribution, with the levy and so on, actually you have to, and then you have to provide accommodation and so many things. Actually, the cost of employing one foreign labor now is easily at least 2,500 ringgit a month, at least. Normally, it goes to even higher than 3,000. The median wage in this country is 2,700 ringgit a month. Graduate entry-level salary is about 3,000, and this is graduate, which is comparable to foreign laborers, but we still want foreign labor. So I think that our push for more complexity in the economy, so that we create more technology and become innovative, is also contingent on our ability to loosen the dependency on cheap foreign labor. And at least I can speak for myself, unpopular as it is, we are quite determined to do it. And RMK 13 will have a series of policy proposals to expedite the current official quota of foreign laborers of 15%. Now it's 15%. We are hoping that we can drastically push it to a more acceptable level within 5 years and 10 years.
This is probably the last question, but it's a combination of two questions here. It's related to the focus on high-tech industry. On one hand is the players, i.e. how can we promote more SMEs to be more involved in the high-tech side? The other related question is basically how do you then promote private equity, if possible, into this high-tech industry?
Yeah. Those two areas mentioned basically are among the most problematic structural defects that we have in our economy. First, we don't have enough PE and VC, and we need to work on our capital mobilization model, because only when we get it right, then we can bring investments into technology. So KL20 last year was part and parcel of it. We are still focusing, and then FEM, for example, is trying to sell that growth narrative idea so that we attract more PE and VC internationally. More investments coming here, more PE and VCs coming. So there's a parallel stream to that. The other stream is about scaling up our SMEs. I don't know in the auditorium whether we are aware that 97% of incorporated business entities in Malaysia are SMEs. There's only about 2% plus large companies. So our economy has become so lopsided that a lot of the burden is put into that small number of large companies, right? So, one, that's why, I keep saying that we need to loosen our dependency on cheap foreign labours, because they are employed mostly also by the SMEs. So long as we stick to the cheap manual labour, there's no incentive and motivation to invest in technology and motivation. And then when you are not exposed to technology and innovation, even if we are successful in bringing in high-tech investments, it's very difficult to embed our local SMEs into the supply chain. So these things have to happen, simultaneously. Some of it is painful, and I think again it's going to be controversial. I don't know the appetite in the cabinet and in the market, but my view is that we have to bite the bullet, because otherwise we will have all these big investments, but then the gap between our SMEs and the next level of economy is going to get bigger and bigger, and we cannot bring our SME into that kind of supply chain that we want to create.
Okay, thank you, YB. It has been very insightful. It has been very frank. We appreciate that.
I was joking about Memang.
Okay, we will try to prove you wrong one day. Can we put our hands together to thank YB Rafizi for this frank assessment?
Thank you, YB. Thank you, Dato' Karsale.